Yom Shekulo Shabbat, a time that is all Shabbat, Hayom that is ever Shalom, that will never, Yom Shekulo Shabbat. The golden glow of two lights, escape the past, embrace tonight. Candle flicker at dusk, vaguely reveals God's gift.
Page 62, Song of Good News. There we go. Open your ears, God's chosen people. Open your ears and hear good news. Open your hearts, O royal priesthood. God has come to you. God has come to you. God has spoken. God has spoken to his people. Hallelujah. And his words are words of wisdom. Hallelujah. God has spoken to his people. Hallelujah. And his words are words of wisdom. Hallelujah. One more time. God has spoken to his people. Hallelujah. And his words are words of wisdom. Hallelujah. Oh, there was an extra cut there. All right. Just like we rehearsed it. Very good. Let's go to page 76. I'm singing 76 trombone. No, that's a different song. Behold, God is my salvation, page 76. Behold, God is my salvation. I will trust and will not be afraid. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. La 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 trust and will not be afraid. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. For the Lord my God is my strength and my song. He also has become my salvation. La 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 la. Okay, let's go to page 64. When I get I will call upon the Lord. This might be new to some of you. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. I will call upon the Lord, who is worthy to be praised. So shall I be saved from my enemies.
Spanish friends home today.
The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. The Lord liveth, and blessed be the rock, and let the God of my salvation be exalted. All right, let's go to page 56 and sing As the Mountains. We're bringing the bringing the atmosphere down a little bit so we can get worshipful for the service. More thoughtful. Page 56. As the mountains are around Jerusalem, the Lord is all around his people. As the mountains are around Jerusalem, the Lord is all around his people. From this time forth and forevermore, the Lord is all around his people. From this time forth and forevermore, the Lord is all around his people. Like Mount Zion in the midst of Jerusalem, we shall not be moved, we shall not be moved. Like Mount Zion in the midst of Jerusalem, we shall not be moved, we shall not be moved. From this time forth and forevermore, the Lord is all around his people. From this time forth it shall always be, the Lord is all around his people. All right, let's finish with number 7, page 7. Hine lo yanu. So it has Hebrew and English. We'll sing the English first, then the Hebrew. He that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, slumbers nor sleeps, neither slumbers nor sleeps. He that keepeth Israel neither slumbers nor sleeps, slumbers nor sleeps. He slumbers nor sleep, slumbers nor sleep. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Good evening. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
Okay, we're listening to this side of the room here. Thank you for coming tonight. We are celebrating a very special event in our family this weekend, and just a couple of the people I love have joined us this evening, and that is really exciting for me. We do have a few announcements, and the first one I don't think you can miss, bright yellow. We're going to get back on that painting thing outside. Some of you recall we got about halfway around the building, and guests, please don't look on the back side of the building, at least not until after December 4th when we finish painting. But we did pretty good on the front, don't you think? All right. We do have the blue boxes in the back to share something of what God has given with you back. And that is for our family here today. We have, as you're aware, Jacob and Janessa are celebrating their marriage tomorrow, and they will be reading for us this evening. We have ONEG announcement news there. We can pay attention to that. And there is no Torah study tomorrow afternoon, but we will resume again next week. The rabbi likes to always remind us it is a known phone zone, so please silence your phones. And thank you for coming, and I hope you have a very worshipful evening with us this evening. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom.
I greet you and he greets you. How cool.
Mini me.
He's nervous. Yeah, he is nervous. Yeah, he is davening. Thank you very much. Anyhow, that's going to be distracting for me, so if I sort of lose track of what's going on, you'll understand why. As we begin our worship this evening, please turn to pages 144 and 145 from Matovu. It's something that the strange prophet Balaam realized as he looked at Israel in the wilderness and realized how special these people were to God. And it reminds us that we're coming into God's house, into God's presence, so to speak, just like they did. And they could come into God's house because God's house was literally among them as they were there in the wilderness. So we replicate that experience now. As we turn to pages 144 and 145, Richard leads and then we respond.
Elohim, Rov Hazdekah, Anemi, Be'emet, Yishem.
We respond.
How lovely are your tents, O Jacob,
your dwelling places, O Israel. O Lord, through your abounding faithful love, I come into your house, and reverently I worship you in your holy sanctuary. I love being in your house, the place where your glory resides. Here I bow down to worship you, my Lord and Maker. Accept my prayer, O Lord, and answer with your great mercy and with your saving truth.
How lovely are your tabernacles, O Lord of hosts. I long, yes, I pine for the courts of the Lord. My heart joyfully sings to the living God. One thing have I asked of the Lord, that I will pursue, that I may live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the graciousness of the Lord and to enter his sanctuary. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me in the right path. With you is the fountain of life, and in your light do we see light. We now rise, facing Jerusalem, the direction of the ark, for our Amida portions this evening, the abridged and summary sections that you find them on pages 60 to 63. It's our anticipation, these sections are, of the rebuilding of that house we've been talking about. Has to do with the light of the Messiah. Light was mentioned again, as Balaam noticed it among our people. The light of the Messiah, in fact, the son of Jesse. Pages 60 to 63. Allow these words to shape your response to our God this evening. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu v'Elohei Avotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzhak, v'Elohei Yaakov, ha'el hagadol ha'gabor v'hanora, El Elyon Kanei Shemayim v'Aretz. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, God of our ancestors, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, and God of Jacob. You are the great, the mighty, the revered God, the most high God, who is master of heaven and of earth.
Magen avod idmao, mechayem etim b'mamaro, el hakadosh she'en kamohu, amadiach le'amo, beyom Shabbat kadesho. Ivam ratzah laniach lahem, lefnev na'avod v'yirah b'fachad, v'noded yishmo b'chol yom. Amit me'en habarakot, el ha'hodaot, Adon HaShalom, Makadesh HaShabbat, Umbarek Shavi'i, Umadi'aki Kedusha, Le'amed Yushneoneg, Zeher, Lamase, Varesh.
And we respond,
He with his word was a shield to our forefathers, and by his voice will raise the dead. The holy God, like whom there is none, who gives rest to his people on his holy Sabbath day, because he delights in them to grant them rest. Before his presence we will serve with fear and awe. Daily and constantly we will thank him with the appropriate praises. He is the God to whom thanksgiving is due, the Lord of peace, who hallows the Sabbath and blesses the seventh day, and in holiness gives rest to a people filled with delights in remembrance of the creation.
our God and God of our ancestors, accept our rest. Hallow us by your commandments. Grant our portion in your Torah. Satisfy us with your goodness. Gladden us with your salvation. Purify our hearts to serve you truthfully. And in your love and favor, O Lord our God, let us inherit your holy Sabbath. And may Israel, who sanctify your name, rest thereon. Baruch atah Adonai mekadesh ha-Shabbat. Blessed are you, O Lord, who makes Shabbat special. You may be seated. As we kindle the Shabbat lights, we're reminded that Shabbat stands as the eternal, the perpetual sign of the covenant that God has made with us as his people. That covenant, too, is perpetual, and we are permanently his people.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu v'horetu l'goyim v'natan lanu Yeshua Meshikenu ha'olah olam. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who sanctified us by your commandments and commanded us to be a light for the nations and gave us Yeshua our Messiah, the light of the world. Shabbat Shalom.
We prayed for the light of the Messiah. We understand the Messiah is in fact the light of the world. We also understand, as our Tehillat HaBrit Chadashah portion this evening reminds us, on the top of pages 136 and I'll tell you in a minute whether it's the top or the bottom. Bottom of pages 136 and 137. We understand that he is the one from the house of God's servant David. He is the one who is the fulfillment of that for which we have prayed. He is, as we pray on a daily basis in synagogues around the world, when we ask God to make flourish the horn of his salvation, we find that God has done exactly that. He has come and has redeemed his people. Pages 136 and 137 are our response. I will lead you through the opening several verses in Hebrew and ask that you respond with that selection of praise, the entirety of it in English. Baruch Adonai Elohei Yisrael, ki pakad et amo vayishlach lo edut vayarem lanu keren Yeshua b'veit David avdo. Together.
Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, because he has come and has redeemed his people. He has raised up a horn of salvation for us in the house of his servant David, as he said through his holy prophets of long ago, salvation from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us, to show mercy to our fathers and to remember his holy covenant, the oath he swore to our father Abraham, to rescue us from the hand of our enemies and to enable us to serve him without fear, in holiness and righteousness before him all our days.
He is the one who's the answer to our prayers, the daily prayers of our people in synagogues around the world, but he's also the one, as the rabbis of old understood, he's the one who sits as the Messiah on the heavenly thrones. And so from that place of authority, he guarantees our destiny forever. Pages 40 and 41 reflects on that, takes us into that throne room scene as Richard leads and we respond. Pages 40 and 41.
Elohim asher diber mikadem pe'amim rabot uvinakim rabot el ha'avot beyad ha'nevi'im diber aleinu behakabrit hayamim ha'ele beyad ha'ben asher Sale yoresh kol uviado gamasad et haolamim uzohar kevodo betzelem hatzuto benose kol ibaro ragavora ulakar she'asa tihur kataim yashar limin ha'gadula. In the past, God spoke to our fathers through the prophets at many times in various ways. But now, in the end of days, he has spoken to us by the Messiah, his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, and through whom he made the universe. The Son is the full radiance of God's glory, and the flawless manifestation of his reality. He sustains all things by his powerful word. After he made atonement for sins, he sat down in the place of authority beside the majesty in heaven. True and firm, established and lasting, right and faithful, loved and treasured, desired and pleasant, feared and mighty, ordered and acceptable, good and beautiful is this word to us forever and ever.
Loved and treasured, desired and pleasant, good and beautiful, all of those kinds of things. And that's the reason then we continue our response of praise to him for all that he's done for us. And we do so through Half Kaddish, pages 4 through 7.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash Yom divrachirute v'yamlich malchute L'chai lechono yom lechono v'chai lechol beit Yisrael Magalahu v'zman kariv v'imoru Amen Yehesh merah b'vorach le'olam olam le'olam haya yitvarach Yitvarach v'yishtabach v'yitar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal Shemeh l'kodeshah b'ribu Le'ela min kol birkata v'shirata Ushbekata v'nechem atara'am v'yiran le'olma v'imo Amen. Let his name be glorified and sanctified throughout the universe which he created according to his purpose. May he bring about the reign of his kingdom in your lifetime, in your day, and in the lifetime of all of the house of Israel, speedily, soon, and let all say, Amen. Let his great name be praised forever and ever, eternally. Blessed and praised, glorified and exalted, extolled and honored, magnified and lauded be the name of the Holy One. Blessed be he, although he is far greater than all blessings, hymns, praises, and songs which are offered in the world. And all say,
Amen.
The God before whom we come, our Shabbat blessings on page 34 and 35 remind us, the one in whose presence we find ourselves is the God who not only spoke all things into existence, he is the one as well who continues to order the cycles of time and various seasons, allowing us to participate and to respond. Richard will lead. We will respond. Richard will lead us in the first paragraph. We will respond with the second.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam asher bidbaro ma'ariv aravim v'kach mapateh sha'arim dan eibeh. Blessed are you, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who by your word brings on the evening twilight, and by your wisdom opens the gates of the heavens. With understanding, you order the cycles of time and vary the seasons, setting the stars in their courses in the sky according to your will. You create day and night, causing the light to pass away before the darkness, and the darkness before the light. By your will, the day turns into night. The Lord of heavenly hosts is your name. O ever-living God, rule over us forever. Blessed are you, O Lord, who brings on the evening twilight. Baruch atah Adonai ha'ma'ariv aravim.
With everlasting love, you have loved the house of Israel, teaching us your Torah and precepts, your statutes and judgments. Therefore, O Lord our God, when we lie down and when we get up, we will meditate on your instructions and rejoice forever in the words of your Torah and in its teachings, for they are our life and sustenance. We will meditate upon them day and night. May your love never leave us. Blessed are you, O Lord, who loves your people Israel.
Baruch atah Adonai Ohev Amo Yisrael. He loves his people need to love him in return and to acknowledge that he and he alone is their God. And that's exactly what we do as we now stand yet again, facing Jerusalem, in the direction of the ark, and respond with the Shema, pages 34 to 39.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem, Kevod Malchuto, Le'olam Vaed. Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha, B'kol lavavcha, ובכל נפשך ובכל מאודיך, והיו הדברים האלה אשר אנוכי מצווך היום על לבביך, ושיננתם לבדיך, ודיברת בם, בשבתך בביתך, ובלכתך בדרך, ובשעתך ובקומך, ובשרתם להותם על ידיך, והיו לטוטפות בעיניך, וכתבתם על מזוזות ביתך ובשעריך. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord alone. Blessed be He, whose glorious kingdom is eternal. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, and with all your life, and with all your strength. These commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as reminders on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the door frames of your houses and on your gates.
Surah Yisrael on pages 44 and 45 reminds us that we can confidently ask the God who is our help in the past to be our help in the present, which is what we do. Pages 44 and 45, I'll lead you through the Hebrew and ask that you respond with the English. Surah Yisrael, Kuma be'ezrat Yisrael, Uftei kenumecha, Yehuda ve'Yisrael. Together.
Rock of Israel, arise to the help of Israel, and deliver, as you promised, Judah and Israel. Our Redeemer, the Lord of hosts, Adonai Tzebaoth is his name, the Holy One of Israel, Kadosh Yisrael. Blessed are you, O Lord, you have redeemed Israel. Baruch Adonai Go'al Yisrael.
We turn now to pages 88 and 89. We've asked our God to arise to the help of Israel. We now relive the reality of the past, namely God's arising and leading his people, clearing a path for his word, for the Torah, to make its way in his world. Pages 88 and 89.
ויהי בנשוא אהרון ויאמר משה קום אדוני ויפוצו בקע וינוסו משמך מפניך כי מציון תצא תורה כי מציון תצא תורה ודבר אדוני מירושלים ברוך שנתן תורה תורה ברוך שנתן תורה תורה לעמו ישראל And it came to pass, whenever the ark went forward, Moses would say, Arise, O Lord, and let your enemies be scattered. May those who hate you flee from before you. For from Zion shall go forth the Torah, and the word of the Lord out of Jerusalem. Blessed be he who in holiness gave the Torah to his people Israel.
When he gave us the Torah, it was a tremendous treasure, a great gift that he gave to us, one which shapes our lives, or should, a gift to which we need to respond, and we do so on pages 133.
The ark now unveils its treasure.
To our eyes and minds and hearts.
Inside the scroll of Torah stands.
It stands there with all its richness and wisdom.
As we listen, voices speak, voices of our ancestors.
Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Joseph and Moses.
O God, they bring us your instructions for us.
Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel and Leah, and Miriam speak to us as well.
O God, they move us to respond to your promises to us.
We are grateful for your words, the words of Torah.
Hear, O Israel, the Lord calls.
We will hear your words that we may learn them, love them, live them.
What does the Lord require of you? To fear him, love him, serve him, and walk in all his ways.
All the Lord has said, we will do.
Vi Shebarach Avotenu, Abraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. He who blessed our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. May he bless John. May he bless Jay. May he bless Slade. May he bless Abby. May he bless Janessa. And may he bless Jacob, who have come up to honor God and the Torah. May the Holy One bless them and their families, and send blessing and prosperity on all the work of their hands. Baruch Adonai HaMavorach, Baruch Adonai HaMavorach Le'olam Vahed, Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher bakar banu mitol ha'amim, Venatan lahanu et Torato, Baruch atah Adonai, noten haTorah. Bless the Lord, who is blessed. Bless the Lord, who is blessed forever and ever. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who chose us from all peoples and gave us the Torah. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
Yehu Chaisera, 100 Shana, 20 Shana, 7 Shanim, Shanei Chaisera, Atamat Sarah, the Kiryat Arba, Uchadron, Ba'aretz Ka'anan, Yavo Abraham, Isapol Basara, Vakata, Vayakom Abraham, Ma'al Panei Mato, Yedaber al B'nai, Chet, Vayamor, Varavat Teshuv Anarki Imechem, Katanu Li, Akuzak Haver Imechem, Va'akara Mati Holimechem. Please be seated. The life of Sarah. Sarah was 100 years old, and 20 years old, and 7 years old. The sages, as usual, noting this construction, make a suggestion about Sarah. The text hints something about Sarah's character. When she was 100 years old, she had the innocence of someone who was 20. And when she was 20 years old, she had the beauty and the innocence of someone who was 7. And let's see. And Sarah died. Okay. And Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, which is Hebron, in the land of Canaan. And Abraham came or went from where? From Mount Moriah. We'll talk about that in a second. To lament for his wife, Sarah, and to mourn for her. And those who up here can see, there's a very small cup within the text. In the text for crying or wailing. The sages suggest that this speaks of Abraham in his great pain and his sense of loss for his wife, who he loved very much. And Abraham rose up from before his dead, in the face of his dead, before his dead Sarah. And he spoke to the sons of Het, saying, Ager v'tashov, a stranger and a settler, a resident alien. However you want to translate it, it's a term that expresses that someone has no rights, that you're just passing through. That you're not, you do not receive the benefits of governmental protection or any kind of standing within the law, within the kingdom of the ancient world. And Abraham said, I'm a ger teshov, a stranger and alien. I am among you. Give to me a burial place, family tomb among you, and I will bury my dead from before myself. This text is interesting because where it's found in the Torah, it follows immediately after Abraham's trial with the binding of Isaac. The sages suggest that Sarah heard about what Abraham was going to do, that he was going to offer Sarah's one and only son. And then when Sarah heard of this potential offering, she dropped dead in sorrow and sadness. Nevertheless, Abraham returns from his journey. He finds Sarah, they find out that she's passed. And let's notice Abraham. He mourns for his wife heavily. He is saddened to his very core. And then Abraham takes the initiative to go through the text again of securing a burial place for his wife. This is understood as a test because God had promised Abraham earlier on in the text, a few chapters earlier, that this would indeed be part of the promised land. But here Abraham has to go forward and ask and beg for the sons of Het for a burial place for his wife. Needless to say, we can continue, but the thing I want to point out with tonight's occasion is this. Notice Abraham and his love for his wife. This is something that we can take from this text. Husbands, treasure your wives.
I will be reading Genesis 24:58 through 67. So they called Rebekah. Are you willing to go with this man? They asked her. And she replied, yes, I will go. So they told her goodbye, sending along the woman who had been her childhood nurse, and blessed her with this blessing as they parted. Our sister, may you become the mother of many millions. May your descendants overcome all your enemies." So Rebekah and her servant girls mounted the camels and went with him. Meanwhile, Isaac, whose home was in Negeb, had returned to Beer Lahai Roi. One evening, as he was taking a walk out in the fields, meditating, he looked up and saw the camels coming. Rebekah noticed him and quickly dismounted. "Who is that man walking through the fields to meet us?" she asked the servant. And he replied, "It is my master's son." So she covered her face with her veil. Then the servant told Isaac the whole story. And Isaac brought Rebekah into his mother's tent, and she became his wife. He loved her very much, and she was a special comfort to him after the loss of his mother.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chayei olam nata b'tocheinu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who gave us the Torah of truth and life everlasting planted in our midst. Blessed are you, Lord, giver of the Torah.
Each week, in fact, daily, we're reminded of the fact that these are words that come directly from God. And we remember that, reinforce that in our own understanding so we can reinforce it in our own behavior by responding on pages 98 and 99 with the Zohar Torah. This truly is that which came directly from God, delivered to us through the hand of Moses. If you need the transliteration, that is to be found on page 95. English translation, however, is back on pages 98 and 99.
Zohar Torah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael ki Adonai beyad Moshe. This is the Torah which Moses placed before the children of Israel. It is in accord with the Lord's command by the hand of Moses.
You may be seated.
I'll be reading Leviticus 26, 3 through 13. If you obey all of my commandments, I will give you regular rains, and the land will yield bumper crops, and the trees will be loaded with fruit long after the normal time. And grapes will still be ripening when sowing time comes again. You shall eat your fill and live in safety in the land, for I will give you peace, and you will go to sleep without fear. I will chase away the dangerous animals, and you will chase your enemies. They will die beneath your swords. 5 of you will chase 100, and 100 of you 10,000. You will defeat all of your enemies. I will look after you and multiply you, and fulfill my covenant with you. You will have such a surplus of crops that you won't know what to do with them when the new harvest is ready. And I will live among you and not despise you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. For I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, so that you would be slaves no longer. I have broken your chains, so that you can walk with dignity.
You now have the opportunity to participate in a very special tradition, and that's to share in the sweetness of this special celebration. Ready, aim, fire!
Oh, sorry. My physics projectile.
You put through the whole bag.
I almost got richer. Sorry. Life isn't.
Okay, last chance, latecomers.
Quite dangerous for
God is a God of joy, happiness, life. And he celebrates the seasons of life with us. He has also given to us the words of life. It's Chaim. It's called a tree of life. Pages 96 and 97 is that response. These words are intended to take root in our lives, to transform us to, in fact, as we ask, renew our days as of old. Please join on pages 96 and 97.
Es Chaim hi lama kazitima beitol kei ha-meushar derachei ha-darchei noam vechol netivotei ha-shalom Ashivenu Adonai Elecha Ben Shuva Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem Ashivenu Adonai Elecha Ben Shuva Kadesh Yameinu Kekedem Tree of life it is to those who take hold of it, and happy are those who support it. Its ways are ways of pleasantness, and all its paths are peace. Turn us, Lord, to you, and let us return. Renew our days as of old.
On pages 98 and 99, we now rise and turn to Uzuncho Yomar. It's a reminder that God's resting place is among his people who can come into his presence as priests as we await the return of our Messiah. Pages 98 and 99.
Uvenucho Yomar, Shuva Adonai Ribavot Alfei Yisrael. When the ark rested, Moses would say, Return, O Lord, to the myriads of Israel's families. Arise, O Lord, to your resting place, you and your mighty ark. Clothe your priests with righteousness. May those who have experienced your faithful love shout for joy. For the sake of your servant David, don't delay the return of your Messiah. Ba'avur David Abdaka, al t'shev pnei shekach. Hilakach tov, navati lachem. I give you good instruction. Do not forsake my Torah.
Tonight I want to do something just a little bit different. Rather than focus on one passage or the parsha for the week or even several texts, I want to survey a number of them. I want to go on, if you would have it, a tour of several critical and striking passages that describe the relationship that God had with our ancestors and that which he wants from us as well. Now, this will be sort of a walking tour. We'll try to follow God as he walked with us through history. So we'll tour the Torah, stopping briefly at each of the books in the Torah. We'll make a short stop in the prophets. Then we'll pause briefly in the Besserot, or the Gospels. And then we'll conclude with a quick peek into the future. In other words, we'll trace God's path through the sands of time and see how that should impact our lives. And we begin at the beginning. I'm not going to ask that you join me in all these texts. You may feel free to do so if you can get there quickly enough. Genesis chapter 3, verses 8 and 9 is where we'll begin. And the text reads, "Then the man and his wife heard the sound of the Lord God as he was walking in the garden in the cool of the day." And then it says, "And they hid from the Lord God among the trees of the garden." But the Lord God called to the man, "Where are you?" The Lord God was walking in the garden in the cool of the day. The text indicates that this was his regular practice, something he did, and something he did at a specific time, the cool of the day. And verse 9 indicates for us, read in this context, that they usually join him. And he calls to them to find out where they are. Pause for just a second. Adam and Eve regularly walked with God. Now, if you've been on walks, you understand that walks afford an opportunity for in-depth conversation. Walks promote close personal relationships. And that is what Adam and Eve got to participate in with God. Now, even though Adam and Eve hid from God, God did not go into hiding. And we looked at this text last week, so I'm not going to spend much time on it at all. In fact, as it turns out, God popped in on Abraham. The opening couple verses of Genesis 18, the beginning of our parsha, our portion from last week, reads, "The Lord appeared to Abraham near the great trees of Mamre while he was sitting at the entrance to his tent in the heat of the day. Abraham looked up and saw," and in the Hebrew text we have the word hine, which means this is something unexpected that took place. "Three men were suddenly standing nearby. When he saw them," now the Hebrew here is interesting as well, because it's the term ra'ah, which usually implies understanding as well. So he didn't just see, he came to understand what he saw. And as a result, it says he hurried from the from the entrance of his tent to meet them, and he bowed low to the ground. Verse 1 here sets the stage. The Lord appeared to Abraham. That tells us what this story is all about. And it tells us it occurred while he was sitting in his tent in the heat of the day. And then verse 2 begins to tell us some details. Look, what happens here, as we looked at it last week, I'll remind you, the Lord showed up for an impromptu visit with Abraham. And these three, because he was accompanied, they just appeared. And as the Hebrew term hine reminds us, there they were. Abraham understood what was going on, as the text indicates, and responded appropriately. So he hurried and he bowed low. Now, you'll notice that the text indicated for us that this occurred in the heat of the day. Now, if you were listening carefully just a few minutes ago, something else occurred in the cool of the day. Well, this is a literary device. It's a literary framing that highlights the relationship found in between these texts, but as well in these texts. The closeness of relationship. And it emphasizes the lead actor in these texts. And the lead actor is, in fact, the Lord. And that's confirmed for us as we move to verse 10 that says, "Then the Lord spoke to Abraham, I will surely return to you about this time next year, and Sarah, your wife, will have a son." That verse confirms the identity of the primary guest. And he brings an amazing promise. Even though you two have been childless, even though you cannot have kids, even though you are 190, not 190, but 190, you're going to have a kid. The identity, the primary guest, is what makes that possible. Now, this is for some of you in the audience, especially. A Tennessee state trooper pulled over a pickup truck on I-65. The trooper asked, "Got any ID?" The driver replied, "About what?" Well, there was no such ambiguity concerning the identity of Abraham's visitor. God dropped in on them out of nowhere. And he did the same to Moses, by the way, as we now move from Genesis to Exodus. He just showed up in the desert as Moses was literally just minding his own business. Well, actually, he was minding his father-in-law's business, but it's about the same. And God showed up there as a burning bush. And he introduced himself to Moses. And the text in Exodus 3:7-9 says, "The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying because of their slave drivers. I am personally concerned about their suffering. That is radical. God says, I've seen the misery of my people. I've heard them crying. I'm personally concerned and hurt about their suffering. He goes on in verse 9 to say something very similar. The cry of the Israelites has reached me. I have seen the ways in which the Egyptians are oppressing them. In other words, the text begins by telling us something of God's deeply personal involvement with them, his compassion and his connection, both for and to them. And God's response is found in the middle verse, verse 8. God says, so I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them up out of that land into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. If the first part tells us about God's deeply personal involvement with them, this tells us about God's personal intervention on their behalf. And we see the story unfold with the plagues and the Red Sea. It's the story of Pesach, of Passover. Having introduced himself in that way, God continues in verse 12, and he says, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you when you have brought the people out of Egypt. And later, in a similar vein, God promises, Exodus 33 and verse 14, the Lord said, my presence, I myself, our translation has it, that's not badly done. The Hebrew term here is panav, God's face. My presence, I myself will go with you and I will give you rest. Now, what's interesting about these texts is the following. First of all, the first text, and God said, I will be with you, and this will be a sign to you. That is exactly the same grammatically as what occurs 2 verses later, where God says to Moses in response to the question, whom shall I say is sending me? And the translations vary all over the place, but most of them tend to revolve around 1 or 2. I am that I am, or I will be who I will be. And yet, as I said, the grammar is identical to what you have in verse 12, where the text simply reads, God saying, I will be with you. The God who introduced himself to Moses at the burning bush is the God who said, here's what characterizes me. I'm the God who goes with my people. And that's exactly what verse 14 then says. So that tells us something about the name and the nature of God. And the Exodus 33 passage then becomes a confirmation of the commitment and the character of God to go with his people. It's an affirmation that his name truly does mean, I will go with you. And then God provides evidence or a sign of his active personal involvement. He says, this will be the sign to you when you have brought the people out of Egypt. Now, we'll stay in Exodus for just a little bit longer because he becomes even more personally involved later in the lives of his people. First, a quick stop at Exodus chapter 25, verses 8 and 9. And here God says to Moses, I want the people of Israel to make me a sanctuary. Now, hear what he goes on to say, where I can live with them. And then he goes on to say in verse 9, this house of mine shall be a tent pavilion, a tabernacle. I will give you a drawing of the construction of the plan of the tabernacle and the details of each furnishing. And then at the end of the text, he says in verse 40, so make sure you follow the pattern I'm showing you here on the mountain. God asked them, the text is telling us, to build him a home to live in, according to his own specifications. And then we're told at the end of the book of Exodus, the last paragraph beginning in verse 33. So at last Moses finished the work of the tabernacle. And then it says, then the cloud covered the tabernacle, and the glory of the Lord filled it. So Moses was not able to enter because the cloud was standing there, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. That's amazing. Moses, who had a face-to-face relationship with God, finds that when the tabernacle is completed, the Mishkan, and the glory of God fills that, he can't even enter in. Whenever, it goes on to say, whenever the cloud lifted and moved, the people of Israel journeyed onward, following it. But if the cloud stayed, they stayed until it moved. The cloud rested on the tabernacle during the daytime, and at night there was fire in the cloud so that all the people of Israel could see it. This continued throughout all their journeys. Very interesting summary. God personally led his people. First of all, the text says he actually moved into their neighborhood, and then we're told he personally led them from campsite to campsite. When he moved, they moved. But more on that in a minute, because that's the book of Numbers, and we want to take a quick stop in Leviticus first. Because you see, Leviticus tells us he did more than just move in. I'm now in Leviticus 26, verses 11 and 12, where God says, "And I will live among you. I will walk among you and be your God, and you shall be my people. I will live among you. I will walk among you." Amazing. He personally lived among our ancestors. He walked, as it were, along the lanes and the paths of their campsite. Reflect with me very briefly on the scene painted here, and it should remind you of a scene we started with, where God walked with his people in the garden. And that's the reality that our ancestors experienced. He was with our ancestors when they settled into a location, but he personally led them while they were on the move. That's Numbers 10, verses 33 to 36. And you will recognize these verses because they are part of our liturgy, part of our worship on a weekly basis. The text begins by saying, "So they set out from the mountain of the Lord, and they traveled for 3 days. The ark of the covenant of the Lord went before them during those 3 days to find a place to rest." In other words, this text picks up where the end of Exodus 40 left off. As it said, so this happened throughout their journeys. Now we begin to see some of those journeys. And so verse 34, "The cloud of the Lord was over them by day, and when they set out from the camp." The cloud of the Lord, recognize that? It's from the end of the book of Exodus, when God personally moved in to their neighborhood. Verse 35, "Whenever the ark set out, Moses said," here it is, "Rise up, O Lord, may your enemies be scattered, may your foes flee before you." Vayehi ben Soah, as we recited from week to week. God leads the move. And then verse 36, "Whenever the ark came to rest, he said, Return, O Lord, to the countless thousands of Israel." Uvnuko Yomar. Verse 35, we find God personally leading them on their journey. Verse 36, we find God personally pointing out their campsites, their places of rest. When you put the two together, it should remind you of the promise that God made to the people through Moses in Exodus 33:14. "I will go with you." I will do what? I will give you rest. It lets us know that God was personally active and involved in the whole of their lives and through the details of their journey. And he solemnly promised that this would always be so. This would always be the case. That brings us to the fifth and final book of the Torah, Deuteronomy, chapter 31, verses 6 and 8. God speaking through Moses says this, "Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid, for the Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. The Lord himself goes before you and will be with you. He will never leave you nor forsake you. So don't be afraid and do not be discouraged." The text tells us something very clearly. He will always be around, always be there for you. And then it goes on to say he will be true to his name and to his character. What does his name mean? The God who goes with us. What does he do? He will give us rest. And so he says the same here. The Lord goes before you and will be with you. Friends, these were the experiences of our ancestors. And they can, in fact, they should be our experience as well. Now we leap into the prophets for a very amazing and strange promise that probably is quite familiar to you. It's Isaiah chapter 7 and verse 14. The text begins, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign." The Lord himself will give you a sign. Interesting. Particularly in view of what we read toward the beginning in Exodus 3 verse 12, where God said, "I will be with you. This will be the sign for you or to you. And then the text goes on to say, the virgin will be with child and will give birth to a son and will call him Emmanuel. It's a confirmation of the connection to the Exodus text, because Emmanuel means God with us. And what it's trying to tell us is that God himself will personally step into human history. He would do this to become more personally and intimately involved with our people. But by now, you should be able to respond that this is totally in keeping with the personal experience that we've seen our ancestors had. And it's completely consistent with his name and therefore his character and his promises. He is the God who goes with his people. And as promised, so he personally entered human history. Very briefly, we look at the text that we looked at, the second text we looked at last week. Yochanan's Gospel, John chapter 1, verses 14 to 18. Where the text says, the Word became human and made his dwelling among us. Make his dwelling among us? By now that should begin to resonate as something familiar. That's Exodus 25 verses 8 and 9, where God said, I will make my dwelling among my people. We have seen his glory, Yochanan goes on to say. Glory, that should be familiar as well. When the Mishkan went up, what did the people see? The glory of God. And then the text in John goes on, the glory of the one and only who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. Now this text is striking, as I mentioned last week, for a number of reasons. One of which is the term for word is the Aramaic memra. The term for glory is yikar. The term for dwelling is shekhinah. And what's striking about those terms, if you recall from last week, and they're still striking even if you don't recall them from last week or weren't here last week, what is striking is these are the three major terms that the Aramaic Targums used to describe God when they didn't want to use the name of God. The Targums were the paraphrases and interpretive texts that were read in the synagogues from the time of Ezra on. These were the terms that were used to describe God, and these are the terms that are now associated with one called the Word, who became human. And then verse 18 makes it even more striking. No one has ever seen God, but God, the one and only, who is at the Father's side, has made him known. Now that should begin to sound like Elohim Asher, which of course is Hebrews 1:1-3, which we did earlier. But what this verse is telling us is the same thing that I told the yeshiva class last night concerning the plagues of Egypt. Exodus chapter 7 and verse 5. God said, I'm going to do these things so that the Egyptians will know that I, and I alone, am God. Through the plagues, Egypt and Israel were to realize that he is the only God, and that the gods of Egypt were like nothing. It's very much like God's words to us from Mount Sinai, Exodus 20, verse 3. Have no other gods. God, the one and only. Or the proper translation of the Shema, as you recited it, and as most modern Jewish translations pick up as well. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is your God, the Lord alone, the one and only. And given who he is, Matthew 28, closing paragraph says, given who he is, Yeshua came to them and said, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore go and make disciples, teaching them to obey everything I've commanded you. And surely I am with you always, to the very end of the age. That should sound familiar to you all by now, because that is in fact Deuteronomy 31, verses 6 and 8, as we read it earlier. Surely I am with you always. And then Yeshua adds, even to the very end of the age. Why is that important? Because at the end of the age comes the Olam Haba, the Messianic age, when, of course, he will be with us just as certainly. Given who he is, given the authority he possesses, he sends us into life and on a mission. And given all this, he makes the amazing and comforting promise of his presence with us. But perhaps not so amazing after all. It is, after all, what God promised to and delivered for our ancestors. And now, as I promised, a quick glimpse into what the future holds. Revelation 21, opening paragraph. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, derived directly from the closing words of Isaiah 66. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, and I heard a loud voice saying, listen to what it says, now the dwelling of God is with men, and he will live with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God. And then then the paragraph concludes. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death or mourning or crying or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. Wow. That's a quick glimpse into the future. That is too what the prophets had promised. But back to verse 3. Now is the dwelling of God with men, and he will live with them. This is the ultimate consummation and culmination of all that God had promised and all that God has done. It's the full flowering of what our ancestors personally experienced as they wandered through the wilderness. And the last phrases there, they will be his people and God himself will be with them and be their God, those are taken directly from the covenants of old. So this then tells us that this is the fulfillment and ratification of the great covenants that God made with Abraham, through Moses, and to David down through the ages. And he confirmed all these covenants and all these promises in that covenant of renewal that's mentioned in Jeremiah, as well as Isaiah and Ezekiel. In Yiddish we say, new. So, well, we avail ourselves of God's character and commitment as expressed by his name. We can take advantage of the opportunity our ancestors experienced. We can live its reality, God with us. David perhaps expressed it best, and you'll recognize the text immediately. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Hold on to that for a minute. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. Why? For you are with me. God with us. Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. God's dwelling among his people. In other words, we will have the wilderness experience of our ancestors and the ultimate experience of Revelation 21. But let me be honest with you, friends, for the sake of complete transparency at this point, I have to point out an important precondition for all of this wonderfulness. It's hinted at in Psalm 23, verse 3. Remember? He guides me in the paths of righteousness. It's hinted at also in the text we looked at earlier, in which was read for you by tomorrow's groom. Leviticus 26:3. If you obey all my guidelines, all this wonderful stuff happens. If you obey my guidelines. Reminds us of what we responded to earlier in this service. When the question was raised, O Israel, what does the Lord expect of you? Deuteronomy 10, verses 12 and 13. And the response is just this. It doesn't start by saying love him. It starts by saying fear him, then serve him, then love him. And here it is, walk in all his ways. Walk in all his ways. Obey all of his guidelines. To which you should be saying, impossible. So how do we do it? We do it as God instructed us to do it. It's found in the promises of Ezekiel 36, 25 to 27, where God said, I will pour clean water upon you. I will place a new heart within you. I will pour out my spirit upon you. Why? Verse 27 says, so that you can follow my guidelines and heed my instructions. That's why. The Ruach Hashem, the Spirit of God, is here. And that's what powers us, enables us to walk in all his ways. There's another perspective on this that I want to share, and you'll pardon me. Most of you know that I have a favorite theologian. His name is C.S. Lewis. So this comes from The Magician's Nephew, not yet a major motion picture. Aslan, the lion, who's that messianic figure in the theology of C.S. Lewis, says, "It's my wish," he's talking to a young lad by the name of Diggory, "it's my wish to plant a tree that the witch will not dare to approach, and that tree will protect Narnia from her for many years. You must get me the seed from which that tree is to grow." "Yes, sir," said Diggory. I'm not sure what else you would say to a large talking lion, but that's what he said. Now, he didn't know how it was to be done, but he felt quite sure now that he would be able to do it. The lion drew a deep breath, stooped its head even lower, and gave him a lion's kiss. All at once, Diggory felt the strength and new courage that had gone into him. That's a little how the Spirit of God works. This is what lays the groundwork for experiencing all that we've seen tonight, all that our ancestors, in fact, experienced, all that we need for our journey through life. You know this particular poem or poetic selection, but it's appropriate for here and for now. And with this I conclude. One night, a man had a dream. He dreamed he was walking along the beach with the Lord. Across the sky flashed scenes from his life. For each scene, he noticed two sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to him and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of his life flashed before him, he looked back at the footprints in the sand. He noticed that many times along the path of his life, there was only one set of footprints. He also noticed that it happened at the very lowest and saddest times in his life. Now this really bothered him, and he questioned the Lord about it. "Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you'd walk with me all the way. But I have noticed that during the most troublesome times in my life, there's only one set of footprints. I don't understand why, when I needed you most, you would leave me." The Lord replied, "My precious child, I love you and would never leave you. During your times of trial and suffering, when you see only one set of footprints, it was then that I carried you." As he walked with our ancestors, he is the God who goes with us today. Take the next minute or so of silence to reflect and to respond. The end of the journey. It reminds us of the ultimate consummation of the lesson that God told Pharaoh. You will learn that I am the only one who's God. Please rise as we face Jerusalem, and we respond with pages 102 to 107.
Aleinu l'shalech ha'adon ha'kol, v'ateikenu lana yotzer bereshit, shelo asanu kavay ha'aratzot, velo samanu k'mishpachot ha'adama, shelo samkalkeinu kahem, v'gor aleinu kekal hamonam, v'yanatu konim, ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויוצר הארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגבי מרומים הוא אלוהינו מלכנו ופסולתו ככתוב בתורתו וידעת היום והשבותה אל לבבך כי אדוני הוא האלוהים בשמיים ממעל והארץ מתחת אלוהו. upon us to praise the Master of all, to exalt the Creator of the world, for he has made us distinct from the nations and unique among the families of the earth. Our destiny is not like theirs, our calling is our task. We bow down and acknowledge before the King of Kings that there is none like him. For he stretched forth the heavens like a tent and established the earth. Truly there is none like our Lord and King. As the Torah says, you shall know this day and reflect in your heart that it is the Lord who is God in the heavens above and on the earth beneath. There is none else. We hope, O Lord our God, to soon behold your majestic glory, when all abominations shall be removed, and all false gods shall be at an end. Then shall the world be perfected under the rule of the Lord Almighty, and all mankind shall call upon your name. For to you every knee must bow, and every tongue declare that you are our God. Reign over us soon and forever. May the kingdom of David's greater Son be established forever. For then shall the words be fulfilled. The Lord shall be king forever, and the Lord shall be king over all the earth. On that day the Lord shall be one, and his name one. V'ne'emar b'haya Adonai, l'melech al ha'aretz, v'yom habu, yiyeh Adonai echad, u'shmo
You may be seated. As we move through the conclusion of our time, so I'm going to try to make my way down there before you all eat everything that's there. But before then, every Shabbat is a blessing, and God is in the business of handing out blessings. So we're now ready to receive that which he promised to us as we stand. And Richard leads us in receiving what God said he would give to us.
And so we say, our God and God of our fathers, bless us with the threefold blessing. Eloheinu ve'Elohei Avotenu, Baracheinu b'baracha hamashulashem. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmarecha. Ya'er Adonai b'navalecha v'yichunecha. Yisa Adonai b'navalecha. Vayasem lecha shalom. May the Lord bless you and watch over you. May the Lord cause the light of his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord turn his face toward you with favor, and may he grant to you peace. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat shalom. Yom Shekel Shabbat.